My son once said the greatest gift I could give him was to disappear. So on his birthday, I did exactly what he asked, just not in the way he expected. He turned 38 that Tuesday. It was snowing lightly in Denver, and I spent the morning baking him a tiramisu from scratch, just like he loved in college. I also bought one from the Italian bakery near Cherry Creek, just in case. That one cost me $180, but it had gold leaf on top and imported mascarpone. I figured his wife might prefer something store-bought, more aesthetic for pictures. I wrapped both in thermal boxes, packed my tote with the candles, his baby photo in a silver frame, and the card I spent 2 hours handwriting. It said, "To my one and only son, thank you for being born. I love you more than you'll ever know." I still don't know how I had so much hope in my hands. If you're a mother, especially one who's given everything, stay with me. This story isn't just about a birthday. It's about the moment you finally learn who your child really is and who you are without them. And if any part of my journey echoes in your heart, don't forget to click follow. I've walked through fire to tell this. By 4:45 p.m., I was standing on their porch with the tiramisu in one hand and my heart in the other. The door opened slower than it should have. Nathan stood there in a gray hoodie and basketball shorts. No smile, not even surprise. Just those tired eyes that didn't match the baby I once rocked to sleep with lullabies from Motown. "Hey, Ma," he said flatly. "You didn't call." "It's your birthday," I said. "I figured I'd surprise you." He stepped aside like he was granting access to an empty warehouse. "Come in." Their house smelled like microwave dinners and cinnamon candles. The twins' backpacks were on the floor. Sophie wasn't there. Her car was gone. Maybe that was a good thing. "I brought tiramisu," I offered. "One homemade, one store-bought. Thought we could have both and judge." Nathan sat on the armrest of the sofa. He didn't ask me to sit. He didn't ask how I was, just stared at the box like it offended him. "Ma," he said slowly, "can I be real with you?" My fingers tightened around the ribbon on the bakery box. Always. "I don't really want to do this anymore." I blinked. "Do what?" He tilted his head like this was exhausting to explain. This whole emotional maintenance thing. You showing up, trying to play happy mom, it's a lot. "I'm not trying to play anything," I said. "It's your birthday." He looked at the tiramisu, then at me, and then he said it. "The best gift you could give me is if you just disappeared." Just like that. No yelling, no drama, just plain ice. I didn't cry. My body froze too fast for tears. The air went out of the room, and I swear for a second I heard my heartbeat in my ears like a fire alarm. He stood and walked to the kitchen, like he'd just mentioned the weather. "I'm not saying I don't appreciate what you've done, but it's a lot, Ma. The guilt trips, the popping by. You're retired now. Go enjoy your life. Just not here." I didn't follow him. I couldn't. My knees weren't working. I picked up both boxes, carefully like they were porcelain, and turned toward the door. He didn't walk me out, didn't even glance back. The only sound behind me was the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the snow had thickened. I stood on the porch for a full minute, staring at the sky. Something inside me knew this wasn't just about today. Something inside me knew I'd never be back. Back in the car, I sat behind the wheel and let the heater blow hot air into my face. The tiramisu sat beside me, silent witnesses to the death of something sacred. I replayed his words over and over. "The best gift you could give me is if you just disappeared." He hadn't said it in anger, he said it like it was true. Like he'd rehearsed it. Like I was a burden wrapped in love and he was finally done unwrapping. At the next red light, I called his phone. He picked up after 3 rings. "Ma? I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay." "When you said that, about disappearing, did you mean it?" He paused. Not long. Just enough. "Yeah, I meant it." Click. I drove in silence, my hands shaking on the wheel. My wedding ring was still on, even though Henry had passed 8 years ago. I glanced at it, then pulled it off. For the first time in my life, it felt like I was wearing someone else's name. When I got home, I put both cakes in the fridge. I didn't eat either. Just stood there for 20 minutes staring at the little note I'd written. "Happy birthday, Nathan. You'll always be my boy." I peeled it off the bakery box and threw it in the trash. That night, I didn't sleep. I made tea. I folded towels. I re-rolled every sock in my drawer. But mostly, I stared at the empty spot on the hallway shelf, the one that used to hold Nathan's kindergarten self-portrait in popsicle sticks and glitter. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I walked to the living room, turned on the lamp, and sat with a notebook in my lap. Page 1, line 1, I wrote, "If I disappeared, this is what you'd lose." That was the beginning. Of what, I didn't know yet. But something in me had shifted. Something had ended. And something was about to begin. I stared at the line I had written. If I disappeared, this is what you'd lose. But I didn't know how to finish it. So instead, I turned back the pages of my own memory. Not the big dramatic ones, but the quiet sacrifices. The ones no one ever applauds. The ones mothers make without witness, without applause, and apparently, without legacy. When Nathan was 5, he got pneumonia so bad they almost admitted him. The prescription wasn't covered by insurance. I remember standing in line at the pharmacy, gripping the slip, realizing the total was $226 and change. I had $22 in my checking account. That night, I walked into a pawn shop on Colfax and sold my wedding ring. The man behind the counter looked at me and said, "You sure?" I said, "I need antibiotics more than I need diamonds." That's what love looks like sometimes. Quiet desperation disguised as errands. When he turned 17, he wanted to go to prom with a girl named Lacey. Her father was a banker. He said he couldn't show up in anything less than a real tuxedo, not a rental, a tailored tux. The one he wanted cost $750. I remember that number because I stared at it for 2 hours in the Macy's catalog. I was working 3 12-hour shifts at the hospital that week. I picked up an overnight rotation from a nurse who was going on maternity leave. I told my supervisor it was for family. That's all I said. I didn't mention I'd be sleeping on benches in the break room between shifts just to save on gas. He wore that tux. He looked so handsome. He never asked how I got it. He just said, "Thanks, Ma," and ran out the door. When college rolled around, I knew he wanted to go out of state. I wanted him to dream big, so I took a second mortgage on the house. $40,000. I remember signing those papers with my hands shaking. My late husband Henry had worked his entire life to pay off that house, and here I was putting it all back on the line. But when Nathan got that acceptance letter from the University of Illinois, the way his eyes lit up, I thought, this is what being a mother is for. He didn't graduate. 2.5 years in, he changed majors 3 times and eventually dropped out. Said he wanted to explore other paths. I didn't argue. I just swallowed the disappointment and kept paying the bills. Then came the wedding, Sophie. She had a smile like a news anchor and a voice that always sounded like it was explaining something to you. They wanted a vineyard wedding, not a church, not a backyard, a vineyard. The venue alone cost $12,000. I remember it exactly, because I wired the payment from my credit union the same week my car needed a new transmission. I chose the wedding, took the bus to work for 3 months. I paid for the flowers, the food, the DJ, the hotel blocks for her family, altogether $32,000. I didn't get a thank you speech, didn't get a dance. They said it would be too old-fashioned to include a mother-son moment. After the wedding, Nathan lost his job, some kind of tech startup failure. He said he'd be back on his feet in no time. "It's just a rough patch, Ma. Everyone's got one." I paid their mortgage for 7 months, $2,000 a month, $14,000. They never missed a payment. They also never mentioned it again. I remember one night, I brought over groceries. Sophie looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, we didn't know you. We're stopping by." Not a thank you, not even a hug. That was the night I started saving receipts in a shoebox. Not to show them, just to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. I kept that box in the closet, along with my old nurse scrubs, my church heels, and the quilt Henry's mother made before she passed. But all those sacrifices, years of them, meant nothing the moment he said those words. The best gift would be if you just disappeared. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through my checkbook registers. I still wrote them by hand. December 14th, mortgage. February 2nd, gas bill. March 10th, groceries. So many entries had their names on them, I could have filed taxes as a household of 4. I opened the freezer and saw the untouched tiramisu. I stared at it like it might answer me, like it might explain how a child raised on love and sacrifice could turn around and treat me like I was a chore. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Marjorie next door, a meme about aging with dignity. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote back to Nathan. One sentence. "I need to ask one more time. Did you mean what you said today?" He replied in less than 5 minutes. "Yeah, I did. I'm sorry if it came out wrong, but I meant it. It's time you lived your life and let us live ours." That's when the ache turned cold. Not because of the rejection, but because of the clarity. There was no misunderstanding, no heat of the moment, just truth. His truth. I was no longer a person to him. I was an obligation. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out the shoebox of receipts. I dumped them onto the carpet, surrounded myself in paper proof of every way I had loved him, and then I started sorting. Prescriptions, prom tucks, tuition payments, wedding costs, mortgage transfers, grocery runs, every piece of proof that I had been more than present. I had been essential. I made a list, item by item, date by date. I didn't stop until sunrise. When I finished, I had 21 pages of documentation, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted pity, but because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined my own devotion. I stapled the pages together and wrote on the front, "For when you ask why." Then I sat on the couch, wrapped in a quilt older than my son's marriage, and let the silence do what it needed to do. For most of my life, I thought being a mother meant showing up no matter what. I thought that love was a kind of endless tab you never asked to be paid. But something shifted in me that day, something deep, something permanent. I looked at that list and realized it wasn't proof for him. It was proof for me. I had shown up, again and again. I had sacrificed, bled, prayed, worked, cried, and given. And now it was time to ask, what happens when the giver finally stops giving? The morning after I finished the 21-page list, I brewed a cup of dark roast and didn't add sugar. I wanted to taste every bitter note. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't pounding. Something had crystallized overnight, cold and clear. I was done being a footnote in my own story. By 9:15 a.m., I was parked outside the branch of Rocky Peak Credit Union where Nathan and I shared a joint account. It was the one I'd opened when he started college so I could send him money easily. I had added his name so he could withdraw, transfer, and swipe at will. It was meant to empower him. Now it was the last rope tethering me to a cycle of invisible labor. Inside, the teller recognized me. "Morning, Mrs. Moore." She smiled. "How can we help you today?" "I'd like to close my joint account with my son," I said. She blinked. "Is something wrong with the service?" "No," I replied. "Something's wrong with the arrangement." She led me to a private booth where a man in a navy vest reviewed my request. "Would you like the balance in a check or direct deposit?" he asked. I looked at the screen. The account held $18,162.33. "Cashier's check, please," I said. "Payable to me alone." I signed the form with a calm I didn't know I possessed. The paper slid across the table, along with a pen I didn't return. I walked out holding the check like it was an exit pass from 20 years of guilt. Next stop? The mortgage office. It was a boxy beige building near downtown Denver, the kind with popcorn ceiling tiles and coffee-stained carpets. I sat across from a woman in a red blouse named Lydia, who tapped her keyboard with long nails. "I'd like to request a full printout of the mortgage history on 1886 Maple Hollow Lane," I said. She asked for my ID. "Are you the homeowner?" she asked. "I'm the co-signer," I corrected. She typed for a few minutes. "Yes, you're listed as joint liability." That phrase struck me harder than expected. Joint liability. For years, I'd been shouldering a house I never lived in, a marriage I didn't create, a family I was slowly being shut out of. But on paper, I was still legally responsible. Still liable. She handed me a folder with the full documentation. Every payment, every missed one. The equity report, the late fees. I read each line like it was a testimony in court. "Thank you," I said. "Would you like to make a payment today?" "No," I said. "I won't be making any more payments." I took the folder home and added it to a growing stack on my kitchen table. The 21-page letter, the bank check, and now the mortgage records. I laid them out like chess pieces, each one marking a move I had never made before. Then I called Arthur. Arthur Levin was in his 70s, sharp as a scalpel, and had been my husband's friend since their military days. After Henry passed, Arthur helped me navigate probate. He never charged me for the small stuff. "Arthur, it's Helen," I said when he picked up. "Good Lord, Helen Moore," he chuckled. "I thought you were done needing old lawyers." "I was," I replied. "Until yesterday." He grew quiet. "What happened?" "I'd rather tell you in person," I said. "And I'll bring coffee. Black, no cream, right?" "Still," he said, "I'll see you at 3. His office was a converted Victorian house with mahogany floors and walls lined with degrees. The smell of old books and lemon polish was oddly comforting. I handed him the folder first, then the check, then the letter. He read slowly, carefully, the way only a lawyer or a father figure could. When he finished, he folded his hands. "You want to disinherit him?" he said. "I want to protect what I have left," I corrected. "And I want to make sure what I've earned doesn't go to someone who told me the best gift I could give him was to disappear." Arthur leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "you've got options." "I want a living trust," I said. "One that bypasses probate entirely. I want it airtight." He raised an eyebrow. "You've been Googling." "I've been mothering for 40 years, I said. "I've earned the right to know where my money goes." He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. "We'll set up a revocable living trust. You'll be the primary trustee. Name a backup in case of incapacity. You want your assets to go where? I want 50% to a charity that supports retired nurses. The other 50, held in trust for my grandchildren. They'll get it when they turn 25. And Nathan? Nothing." He nodded slowly. "That will hold up in court, as long as we document it well and get your medical clearance, mental competence." "I'm sharper than he is," I said, "and my blood pressure's lower." Arthur smiled. "I'll have the draft to you in 48 hours. Before I left, I paused at his door. "One more thing," I said. "Can we put a clause in? Something symbolic." "Such as?" "If anyone contests the trust, they're disqualified from inheriting." "Ah," he smiled. "The poison pill. I like it." Back home, I pulled out my suitcase. It was a beat-up Samsonite I hadn't used in years. I laid it on the bed and ran my hand across the fabric. It smelled like cedar and thyme. I opened my closet, pulled out clothes that felt like freedom, linen blouses, walking shoes, my passport holder. I didn't pack everything, just the essentials. The rest could wait. I took out the envelope with the cashier's check, slipped it into a travel pouch. The tiramisu was still in the fridge. I opened the box and cut a small slice. The mascarpone was still fresh. I ate it slowly, letting the flavor melt on my tongue. This time, I wasn't choking anything down. I walked to my desk and started typing. A letter. Not for Nathan, not for Sophie, but for the future me, the woman I was becoming. It started with one sentence. You thought disappearing would feel like loss, but it feels like liberty. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew what I was leaving behind. And sometimes that's the first real step toward freedom. It started as a whisper, not a voice, not a plan, just a question that kept echoing in my head as I stood in front of the mirror brushing my thinning gray hair. What if you really did disappear? Not vanish, not fake a crime, just vanish from their lives. Stop being the bank, the babysitter, the guilt sponge, the afterthought. Just step off the stage so they could see what the play looked like without you. It sounded radical the first time. The second time, it sounded like mercy. I opened the junk drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a travel agent's business card I'd picked up at the library months ago. It had a navy blue logo and a name in Celtic font, Klaus O'Connell, Custom Journeys. I dialed. He answered on the second ring with a lilting Irish accent that sounded like rain and tea. Klaus speaking. Mr. O'Connell, I said, I'm looking to plan a long-term stay in Ireland, possibly indefinite. I'm 71, retired American. I have no criminal record, no medical restrictions, and I'd like to go quietly. He didn't flinch. Are you running from something or towards something? Maybe both, I said. He paused just long enough for it to feel human. We can help with that. Have you ever been to Dublin? Only once, 40 years ago. I remember the air more than the sights. That's a good start, he said. Let's talk logistics. By the end of the call, I had a one-way ticket to Dublin for April 11th, a list of temporary insurance providers, and the name of a furnished flat near the River Liffey. It was happening. I called Marjorie next. She was my neighbor, my friend, and the only person who still showed up on my doorstep with soup and questions that didn't feel invasive. When she heard my voice, she came over in 5 minutes flat, wearing house slippers and a hoodie that said, "Read banned books." I poured her chamomile tea. She sat without saying a word. I'm leaving, I said. Marjorie blinked. Leaving for the weekend? For Ireland, I said, indefinitely. She stared for a full 5 seconds. Are you sick? No. Are you angry? Yes. She leaned forward. Then I support you. We didn't cry. We just sat in silence, letting the truth settle between us like a familiar dog. I need you to do something for me, I said. Anything. When I leave, I want you to be the one who tells them, Nathan and Sophie. I want you to find the letter I'll leave. Read it first, then give it to them. But wait a day or two. Let it feel real. You're staging a disappearance, she said, no judgment in her voice. I'm giving them exactly what they asked for. She nodded. Where's the key? I slid it across the table. Spare one's in the spice drawer. Don't tell anyone where I've gone. Not even the twins. She touched my hand. You sure you want to do this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next day, I started writing the letter. Not a goodbye note. Not a guilt trap. A record. It began with the title, What You Never Saw. I typed for hours. I listed every sacrifice, every dollar, every night, every phone call unanswered. I added receipts, copies of bank statements, photos of prom, the printout of the second mortgage, the registry from their wedding with items I bought checked off in red pen, 21 pages, not to shame, just to make undeniable. At the end I wrote, You said the best gift I could give you was to disappear. So I'm giving it to you. But I won't vanish in shame. I'm leaving with dignity. And every cent you thought you owned was never yours. I printed it on thick cream paper, folded it once, placed it in a blue envelope, wrote Nathan and Sophie on the front, Then I tucked it inside a linen box and left it on my kitchen counter beside the family photo from the wedding. I attached a sticky note that said, "Marjorie, this is yours to deliver." Packing took half a day. I filled one suitcase and one carry-on, passport, travel check, copies of the trust documents Arthur sent over, and a laminated printout of my temporary insurance. I packed 3 scarves, 2 sweaters, and the one pair of black leather shoes I used to wear to the hospital chapel when patients passed. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and looked around one last time. The wedding photo on the wall, the ceramic angel Nathan made in 3rd grade, the crocheted Afghan my mother gave me when I had him. I didn't take any of them. They belonged to a version of me I was ready to outgrow. The next morning, I called for a taxi. Marjorie hugged me on the porch. Neither of us said goodbye. We both knew that word was too final for something this necessary. At the airport, security was routine until I reached the immigration desk at Dublin. The officer flipped through my passport and frowned. "Your travel insurance is missing a regional code," he said. "It's incomplete." My chest tightened. I was told this covered all of Ireland. "It needs to be country-specific. Without it, we can't process your extended stay registration." He handed it back with a polite but firm smile. For a moment, I stood frozen. The idea that I'd made it this far only to be turned away, it felt like a cruel joke. I stepped aside and pulled out my phone, dialed Klaus. He answered instantly. "Everything all right, Ms. Moore?" "I'm at customs. They say the insurance isn't valid. Missing a code." He didn't panic. "Give me 5 minutes." He hung up. I paced. I whispered prayers. I tried not to cry. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Klaus had emailed an updated document with the correct codes, verified and stamped. I handed it to the officer. He glanced at it, then stamped my passport. "Welcome to Ireland," he said. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. A cab dropped me at the furnished flat along the River Liffey. It was a small 3rd-floor apartment with creaky floors, flowered drapes, and a kettle older than my retirement plan. I stood at the window, watching the sun bleed into the water. Then I reached into my carry-on and pulled out a scarf I'd bought online weeks ago, a cashmere wrap in emerald green, $95. My first purchase just for me in a long time. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat by the window. Outside, people were walking, laughing, living. Inside, I was finally no one's mother, no one's banker, no one's burden. I whispered it out loud. My son said the best gift would be if I disappeared. So I did. And for the first time in my life, it felt like a gift to myself. I woke up to rain tapping on the window pane like an old friend checking in. The city outside was foreign, but the sound was familiar. In Denver, storms arrived with thunder. In Dublin, they crept in soft, steady, like they'd been living in your walls all along. I made tea, black, no sugar, and stood by the window watching people with umbrellas walk across the Halfpenny Bridge. There was something beautiful in how ordinary they looked. No one was rushing. No one was pretending. They were just moving through weather, heads down, coats tight. I was one of them now. A face in the rain. That morning, I wrote out my new address on 3 sticky notes. One went inside my passport, one taped inside the kitchen cabinet, the third slipped into my wallet. I no longer belonged to anyone, but I belonged somewhere. I spent the first day unpacking slowly. I hung my clothes in the small wardrobe and placed my shoes on the mat by the door. I lined up my tea bags in a tin labeled Granny's Cures, which made me smile. I wasn't anyone's granny right now. I was just Helen Moore, retired nurse, tenant of flat 3B. By mid-afternoon, I ventured outside. The rain had thinned to a mist. I walked along the riverbank following the cobblestones until I found a tiny bookstore with yellowing windows and a crooked sign that read, "The Wandering Page." Inside, it smelled like paper and peat smoke. The woman behind the counter had gray curls and glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She didn't ask me where I was from. She just nodded. I picked out a novel by a local author and a used guidebook on Irish history. As I paid, she said, "Don't let the weather fool you. It clears faster than it threatens." I liked that. On the way home, I stopped by a corner grocery. I bought brown bread, butter, jam, and a wedge of cheddar. It all came out to 13.22 euros. I paid in cash. Back in the flat, I made a sandwich and sat on the windowsill with a blanket over my lap. Below, a couple argued gently over a stroller. A street musician tuned a violin. Two teenagers threw fries at each other across a bench. I wasn't part of it, but I didn't feel outside of it either. I just was. The next morning, I faced my first real hurdle. A letter slid under the door from the local immigration office, a reminder to submit my long-term stay documents, including proof of insurance, residence, and intent to remain. I thought I had it all. But when I opened my file, one form was missing, the utility verification, proof that I actually lived at the address listed. I called Klaus. He answered on the first ring again. "Let me guess," he said. "Immigration form blues?" "I'm missing the utility bill. They won't approve the stay without it." "Hold tight," he said. "I'll call the rental agency. They'll send a verification on letterhead with your name and address." Less than 20 minutes later, I had the PDF in my inbox. I printed it at the cafe downstairs for 70 cents. When I walked into the immigration office the next morning, the clerk at the window glanced at my paperwork and nodded. "You're more organized than most," she said. "I used to be a nurse," I replied. "That explains it." She stamped the form, handed it back, and smiled. "Welcome to Ireland." As I stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. It spilled across the cobblestones like someone had just flipped the switch on a movie set. I treated myself to something warm. A soft gray cashmere scarf I'd seen in the window of a boutique near the river. It cost $95, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my bank balance first. I didn't worry whether Nathan had paid the mortgage or if Sophie needed gas money. I just bought it, because I liked it. I draped it around my shoulders and looked at myself in the window's reflection. I didn't look wealthy. I didn't look lost. I just looked still. That night, I lit a single candle, made a bowl of soup, and sat at the desk near the window. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. Today, I lived exactly how I wanted. Then I turned the page and wrote another. My son said the best gift would be if I disappeared, so I did. I underlined it twice. I repeated it aloud, slow and even, not out of spite, not out of anger, but because it was true. No one knew where I was. No one could demand my time, my money, my energy. No one could twist love into an invoice. I thought I would feel lonely. I didn't. I thought I would feel guilty. I didn't. What I felt standing in that small kitchen with soup on the stove and rain outside was free. The next morning, I started a new ritual. Tea, a walk, something beautiful, something useful. I made a list of small things I wanted to learn. Take a watercolor class, learn to cook something French, visit the fishing village with the pastel houses Klaus mentioned. I sent no updates. I posted nothing. I was a ghost to them now. But I was finally visible to myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of disappearing that matters most. I knew the letter had reached them when my phone started buzzing nonstop. Voicemails, texts, missed calls, all from Nathan. I didn't pick up. Marjorie had followed the plan exactly. Wait 2 days, let the silence set in, then place the linen box on their doorstep and walk away. She didn't even stay to watch them open it. But I imagined it perfectly. Nathan reading the front, to Nathan and Sophie, with a half laugh, thinking it was some emotional plea. Sophie hovering behind him with arms crossed, lips tight. Then the tearing of the envelope, the weight of the pages, the timeline of their entire marriage laid out in black ink, each dollar like a mirror held up to their entitlement. They would have flipped through it quickly at first, confused, defensive, then slower, then silent. I checked my phone after dinner. There were 11 missed calls. The latest voicemail started with him saying, "Ma, what the hell is this?" and ended with, "Call me back, please." I didn't. The next day, he tried again and again. Finally, I answered on the 5th ring. "Where are you?" he asked. I didn't respond. "I'm serious, Ma. You can't just disappear like this. You told me that was the best gift I could give you." He groaned. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant. I asked you. Twice. You confirmed it." There was a pause. "Okay, maybe I was frustrated. Maybe I was stupid. But what you did, this is cruel." I almost laughed. "Cruel is telling your mother to vanish on your birthday." I didn't mean vanish. I meant take a break, get space, not disappear to God knows where with all the money and legal stuff. The money I earned, the legal stuff I put in place to protect myself. He was quiet for a moment. "Look, I just need to understand what this means." "It means I've removed myself from the equation, emotionally, financially. You're free now. Isn't that what you wanted?" "No, I didn't want you to cut us off." "You didn't think that would be part of disappearing?" I heard him pacing. I imagined him in the living room, hand in his hair, eyes darting to Sophie, who was probably silently panicking behind him. "Look," he said, "we're in a tough spot right now. I lost some work. Sophie's hours got cut. Things are tight." I said nothing. "There's this loan I took out, short term, just to cover the kids' school trip and some stuff for the house." "How much?" I asked, already knowing it wasn't about a school trip. He hesitated. 40,000, he finally said. I exhaled, not in shock, but in confirmation. "There it is," I said quietly. "What's that supposed to mean? You didn't call because you missed me. You called because you missed the lifeline." "That's not true. I was worried." "You were exposed," I corrected. "You read that letter, saw the accounts closing, the trust documents, and realized for the first time you actually had to stand on your own. That's not fair. Neither was asking me to disappear." He sighed. "So what, Ma? You're just gone? That's it? You're just cutting your son off and walking into the sunset like some movie character?" "I'm walking into my life, one where I'm not resented for existing." "But the kids," he started. "They'll be fine," I said. "The trust will take care of them when they're older. Until then, you'll have to do what the rest of us did. Figure it out." "You're punishing me. I'm protecting me." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Do you hate me?" That stopped me. "No," I said. "I don't hate you, but I no longer recognize the boy I raised, and I won't sacrifice the woman I am for the man you've become." He hung up. I let the phone drop to the table and stared out the window. It was raining again. Dublin seemed to weep with me, quietly and without drama. A few hours later, Sophie sent an email. The subject line was, "I didn't know." I opened it slowly, expecting more deflection, but it was surprisingly restrained. "Helen," I read the letter. "I didn't know the full picture. I knew you helped us, but I never realized how much or for how long. I won't make excuses. Nathan is spiraling. He's not handling this well. But maybe he never learned how. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I hope, wherever you are, you're safe. Please don't punish the twins for our mistakes. They miss you. We all do." I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop. The words were softer than Nathan's, but the intent was still centered around guilt, not understanding, not accountability. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a walk along the canal, bought myself a pastry, sat in the park and watched an old man feed the birds. When I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote, "When you finally say no, people will call you cold, but they forget how long you said yes." I set the pen down and looked around. There were no picture frames, no sticky notes on the fridge, no obligations waiting. Just me. And for the first time, That was enough. It didn't take long for Nathan to escalate. Less than a week after that final phone call, I received an alert from my credit monitoring service. Someone had attempted to access my old joint account, one that had already been closed and cleared. The system flagged it as a security check, but I knew exactly who it was. Nathan wasn't handling the silence well, and he was about to make it worse. The next day, Marjorie messaged me, "A man in a suit knocked on your door. Left a card. Something about adult welfare check?" I called Arthur immediately. He picked up with his usual calm. "Helen, what's happened?" "Nathan's trying something. Welfare check. Maybe worse." Arthur sighed. "That boy doesn't know when to stop. What's the fastest way to shut this down legally?" He paused. "First, we document your mental and physical competence. Second, we get ahead of any false claims. If he's filing reports, we'll need to respond, publicly and preemptively." "I'm not afraid," I said. "No," he replied, "but he should be." Later that afternoon, I visited the U.S. consulate in Dublin. The waiting room was full of travelers with passport issues, student visa questions, and one woman sobbing over a lost document bag. I waited in silence until they called my name. The officer, a calm woman in her 40s, led me into a small side office. "Ms. Moore," she began, "we've received notice from a relative, your son, claiming concern over your well-being. Specifically, he raised the possibility of cognitive decline." I didn't flinch. "He said I'm senile?" In kinder words, yes. I reached into my bag and handed her 3 documents: a letter from my primary care physician in Denver, a notarized statement from Arthur confirming recent legal work, and a copy of the notarized trust documents, all dated within the last 30 days. She reviewed them silently. "Would you be open to a brief mental status exam today? We do it in-house." "I insist on it," I said. She smiled, surprised. "All right." The test was routine: orientation questions, memory recall, math problems, language tasks. I passed every section without hesitation. As I handed her back the final worksheet, I said, "You know, I spent 30 years administering harder versions of this to stroke patients. He should have known better." The officer laughed quietly. "Your file will reflect full competence. No concerns. If your son continues to pursue this, he'll be opening himself to legal consequences." "Then let's help him open that door." The next day, Arthur filed a formal response to Nathan's claims. A cease and desist letter went out, along with a warning. Continued harassment, including any further defamation, would result in a counter lawsuit. Nathan didn't respond in writing, but 2 days later, Arthur forwarded an email from Nathan's newly hired attorney, asking for a mediation opportunity. Arthur's response was swift. "There is no dispute to mediate. My client has acted within the full extent of her legal rights. Further communication should be directed to this office only." I kept the email. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Not just absence, but pressure. I knew Nathan wouldn't give up easily. He'd tasted control his whole life. He wouldn't let go without flailing. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, a summons arrived. Nathan was filing a petition in Denver County Court to challenge the validity of the trust. His claim that I had been unduly influenced and medically unfit at the time of signing. He wanted the documents voided. He wanted the assets frozen. He wanted the house back under his name. Arthur called me the moment he read it. "He's bluffing," he said, "but will respond aggressively." I nodded, staring at the window. "What's the next step?" I asked. "I file a motion to dismiss based on lack of evidence, and I request a public hearing." "A public one?" I asked. "Yes," Arthur said. "Let the world see exactly what this is. That's how we end it." I took a long breath. "Then do it." The hearing date was set for June 14th. I wouldn't be there in person. Arthur would represent me fully, but I sent a written statement, signed and notarized, to be read aloud before the judge. I spent an entire evening writing it. It didn't beg. It didn't accuse. It simply stated facts. My history as a nurse, my financial records, my choices made in full clarity, and my son's pattern of dependency. I ended it with a single line. When love becomes debt, sometimes the only way to pay it off is to walk away. Arthur told me later that the judge read it twice. Nathan didn't stand a chance. The motion to dismiss was granted. The court found no evidence of incompetence or coercion. The trust remained intact. Nathan's petition was rejected in full, but it didn't end there. Arthur filed a counterclaim, defamation and emotional distress, based on the false accusations submitted to both legal and diplomatic authorities. Nathan's name would now appear in public court records, not as a concerned son, but as a failed claimant trying to undo his mother's independence. And for once, he had to answer to someone. Back in Dublin, I went for a long walk that evening, past the bookstore, over the bridge, into a small chapel I'd never entered before. I sat in the pews, alone. No prayers, just breath. I had done what many women never dared, said no, legally, loudly, and with evidence, and I had won. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Because some wars aren't waged with violence. They're fought with paper, patience, and the power to walk away. The day after Arthur called to confirm the case had been dismissed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and created a new email address, not tied to family, not recycled from old usernames, just my name, my city, and a number. It felt like claiming space, even in something as mundane as an inbox. Then I opened a blank blog page. It started with a title I had scribbled weeks earlier on the corner of a grocery receipt, Silver Voices. The subtitle read, What We Never Say Until We're Forced to Leave. I didn't start with the court, case, or the tiramisu, or the disappearing act. I started with the first memory that ever made me feel invisible. My son was 5, and he had a fever that made him hallucinate. I stayed up 3 nights giving him cold compresses, whispering songs, calling the nurse line every 3 hours. When it finally broke, he looked at me and said, "Thanks, Mommy. You're magic." That was the last time he ever called me that. The post wasn't long, maybe 1,000 words, but it ended with this. We mothers often disappear long before we physically leave. We vanish in daily sacrifices, in swallowed words, in the space we carve for others until nothing is left but a shadow, holding everything together. This time, I chose to disappear on my own terms, and I've never felt more seen. I hit publish without overthinking it. Then I closed the laptop and went to make soup. The blog didn't explode overnight. But by the 3rd day, a retired teacher from Ohio left a comment. I raised my son alone, paid his loans. He blocked me when I couldn't help with his down payment. Thank you for putting this into words. Then came a message from a woman in New Zealand, then Texas, then Berlin. Women in their 60s and 70s, nurses, custodians, office managers, grandmothers, former social workers. They weren't angry. They were raw, and they were grateful. One comment read, "It feels like you stood up in a room full of silent women and said, 'We are allowed to stop.'" After a week, I received an invitation to speak on a small YouTube channel run by a woman named Erica Dawson. She was in her 40s, wore thick glasses, and spoke with calm fury. Her show was called Dignity Rising, and it featured everyday women who had drawn the line and chosen themselves. We recorded the interview over Zoom. She asked if I wanted to use my real name. I said yes. She asked me what triggered it. I said, "He told me the greatest gift I could give him was to disappear. So I did." She blinked, visibly shaken. "And you didn't hesitate?" "Oh, I hesitated. I cried. I second-guessed. But then I remembered every dollar, every ride, every favor, every time I swallowed my pride, and I realized I'd already been disappearing for years. This time, I wanted it to count." The interview went live on a Thursday morning. By Friday night, it had 60,000 views. Erica messaged me in all caps, "You're striking a nerve." I didn't check the comments at first. I was afraid. But Marjorie emailed me a screenshot. It was from a young woman who wrote, "My grandmother raised me while my mom disappeared. I always thought she was just always there. Now I wonder how much she gave up. I called her tonight to say thank you." That made me cry. Not the cruel things Nathan had said, not the legal fight, but the idea that someone's grandmother, somewhere, felt appreciated for the first time in decades because of my voice. Few days later, I received an email from Sophie. The subject line simply said, "They're asking questions." Inside was this: Helen. "Since your story came out, people have been reaching out. Nathan's boss saw the video. So did a few parents from the school. He's angry. He says you're making him look bad. I don't think he understands. He did that to himself. I don't know what you want from me, but I do know I was complicit. And I'm sorry." I read the email 5 times. Then I opened a reply window. I typed one sentence. It's not about making him look bad. It's about finally seeing myself clearly. Then I deleted it and closed the browser. Not everything needed to be said. 2 days later, a small package arrived at the front desk of my building. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper and a drawing of a woman with gray hair and a bright orange scarf. She was standing on a bridge, holding the hand of a small child. Below it were 12 crayon-scrawled words. "Grandma, we saw your video. We're proud of you." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. I knew those hearts drawn around the edges. I clutched the drawing to my chest and sat on the couch for a long, long time. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something simpler and maybe more powerful. Recognition. They knew I existed. They knew what I had done, and they were watching. That night, I wrote a new blog post titled, "Legacy Isn't Inheritance." In it, I wrote, "My legacy is not the money I leave. It's the boundary I set. It's the silence I broke. It's the fact that my grandchildren now know what it means to walk away with your head high, not because you hate, but because you've had enough." I ended the post with a quote I'd kept taped to my bathroom mirror for years, but never truly believed until now. Respect is not owed because of blood. It's earned through behavior and kept through choice. I went to bed that night with the drawing beside my pillow, and for the first time in a long time, I dreamed not of regret, but of rain, of bridges, of small feet running across cobblestones towards something better. 3 weeks after the video interview went viral, Nathan's name began circulating in places he never expected it to. The blog post had been shared across nursing forums, elder advocacy groups, and several women's rights pages. But it was when someone clipped the line, he said the best gift I could give him was to disappear. So I did, and paired it with my voice that it really caught fire. People weren't just watching, they were quoting. They were stitching it into videos. They were adding their own stories underneath. And that's when the consequences arrived. Arthur emailed me first. "You may want to sit for this one," he wrote. Attached were 2 PDFs. One was a foreclosure notice from Nathan and Sophie's lender. As other was a statement showing the repayment of the second mortgage I had co-signed years ago, only now fully discharged, with proceeds returned to me after the trust reclaimed my legal interest. It was a neat sum, $160, $830.34 down payment, mortgage contributions, accrued interest, reclaimed by law. It landed in my trust account like a quiet reward for finally saying no. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stared at the number for a full minute. It was never about the money, but money has a way of telling the truth. Marjorie called the same day. "You might want to turn on Channel 7, she said. "They're running a segment." I clicked through the live stream. A local reporter stood outside the house on Maple Hollow Lane, my old co-signed address. Behind her, a sheriff's deputy was taping a foreclosure notice to the front door. The camera zoomed in briefly. You could see Nathan in the window, shouting, Sophie pulling him back. The reporter explained the background: a civil case involving alleged financial elder abuse, a failed petition, a viral interview from Dublin that had turned into a quiet storm. They never mentioned names, but those who knew. I watched the whole segment without blinking, not out of joy, out of recognition. For years, that house had been my open vein. I had bled into every payment, every loan extension, every emergency cover. Watching it slip away from him wasn't revenge, it was balance. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Nathan. I let it go to voicemail. His voice cracked as he spoke. Ma, I don't know what to say anymore. The house is gone. The accounts are frozen. The firm won't return my calls. Sophie won't even look at me right now. And the twins. They just asked if they're ever going to see you again. I told them I don't know. He paused. Is that what you wanted? To break everything? I pressed delete without listening to the rest. Because no, this wasn't what I wanted. I wanted him to take responsibility. I wanted him to grow up. I wanted him to remember who raised him and stop punishing me for loving him too much. But more than that, I wanted peace. And sometimes, peace only comes after everything else is stripped away. That night, I took a long walk. I wandered into a quiet part of the city I hadn't visited before. Narrow streets, ivy climbing up stone walls, a bakery with frosted windows, and a sign that read, "Closed but dreaming." I stopped in front of a toy shop. In the window was a pair of knitted dolls, one old woman in a shawl, one little boy holding a map. There was no price tag. I stood there a while, just watching. When I got home, I opened my laptop and checked the trust account again. The $160,834 was still sitting there untouched, secure. I clicked into the section labeled Beneficiaries. Under Future Distributions, I updated a note. Funds to be made available to James and Lily Moore on their 25th birthdays. Unrestricted access, accompanied by a letter from Helen Moore. I opened a new document. I titled it, "To my grandchildren, when you are ready." I wrote, "You may have heard a lot of things, some true, some painful, some twisted to protect those who didn't protect others. But here's what I want you to know. I loved you from the beginning. I disappeared not from you, but for me. So I could show you what it means to walk away when staying would cost your soul." I saved the file. I closed the laptop. The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew a small sum, just enough for a train ticket and a weekend in the countryside. When the teller handed me the bills, she said, "Planning something fun?" I smiled. "Something overdue." I took the 10 a.m. train to County Wicklow. The windows blurred with green fields and stone walls. Sheep dotted the hills like clouds on land. I stayed in a tiny cottage near a forest trail. No television, no Wi-Fi, just tea, firewood, a notebook, and silence. That night, I lit a fire and sat under a heavy quilt, my cashmere scarf wrapped around my shoulders. I thought about Nathan. I thought about Sophie. I thought about the house that wasn't mine and the money that was. I thought about the little girl and boy I once rocked to sleep, and I whispered aloud into the fire, "May you grow from this, even if I never see it." In the morning, I left a note for the innkeeper. "Thank you for the peace. I paid in full. The tip is in the teapot." On the train ride back to Dublin, I didn't think about Denver. I didn't think about what Nathan had lost. I thought about what I had found. And that was more than enough. The days after the foreclosure felt oddly still. No more calls, no more legal updates, no sudden knocks on the door. Just the quiet that follows after a storm levels everything. I'd built a new life. That much was true. But freedom, I was learning, didn't come without echoes. I spent my mornings walking the same loop through the neighborhood, Past the old church, through the bookstore, along the canal where swans floated like poems. The scarf I'd bought on my first week here was starting to show wear. One thread had loosened near the hem. I found myself tugging at it absent-mindedly, again and again. Something inside me felt frayed, too. One Thursday, I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. A group of mostly older women gathered around a long table, mixing pigment and stories. Ingrid was one of them. She was 72, originally from Hamburg, and had moved to Dublin 10 years ago after retiring from teaching. She painted flowers with surgical precision and talked with a gentleness that made you forget how sharp her mind was. During break, we sat on a bench outside the center, sipping tea from thermoses. "You've got a look in your eyes," she said, peering at me over her rimless glasses. "What kind of look?" "Like someone who escaped a fire but still smells smoke." I smiled faintly. "That obvious?" She shrugged. "Only to those who've smelled it too." I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. Enough about Nathan, about the house, about the line he crossed that finally pushed me to save myself. She nodded the whole time. When I finished, she said, "You did the bravest thing a woman can do." "Leaving?" "No, refusing to stay where you are, only loved for what you provide." That night, I walked home through misty streets. The city shimmered under street lamps, soft and dreamlike, but my heart felt heavier than usual. I climbed the stairs to my flat, kicked off my shoes, and stared at the small collection of photos on my shelf. Landscapes, street scenes, flowers from class. Not one picture of family, not one drawing from a grandchild's hand. I tried to sleep, but dreams wouldn't come. At 2 a.m., I found myself standing in the kitchen making tea just for the warmth. I looked out the window and whispered into the dark, "Do they hate me now?" The question didn't feel bitter, just hollow. There was no way to know, and maybe that was the price. The next morning, a small envelope arrived. No return address, just my name written in round, careful letters. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. "Dear Grandma, we saw your picture on the computer. Mommy showed us. She said you went away, but we miss you. We liked the story you told on the video. Daddy looked mad, but we're not mad. Mom said we can write you even if we don't know where you are. I'm reading chapter books now. Lily is drawing better. We hope you're not sad. We are proud of you." It wasn't signed with a name, just a smiley face and a crayon heart. I sat on the couch and cried, not from regret, not from pain, but from the unbearable weight of love that still lived on the other side of silence. The letter didn't undo anything. It didn't erase the lost years or the court battles, but it gave something I didn't know I was starving for: acknowledgement. That they remembered, that they felt something, that somewhere, across oceans and misunderstandings, love hadn't drowned. I placed the letter on the windowsill beside my tea tin. Later that afternoon, Ingrid and I took a short train ride to the coast. We hiked a green cliff trail, the ocean roaring below like an ancient lullaby. At the summit, we sat on a rock and stared at the sea. "Do you ever regret not having children?" I asked her. She thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I think, I've had peace. Books, gardens, students who still write to me. I've had years no one took from me. That's not nothing." I nodded. Then she looked at me. "Do you regret yours?" The wind picked up. I clutched my scarf tighter. "I don't regret loving them," I said, "but I regret thinking that loving them meant erasing myself." She placed her hand on mine. "Then maybe this is your second draft." That night, I lit a candle and opened my notebook. I wrote, "Love without boundaries becomes sacrifice. Sacrifice without respect becomes resentment. I don't want to be remembered as someone who gave everything. I want to be remembered as someone who reclaimed something too." I closed the notebook and looked around my flat. It was quiet, but not empty. It held pieces of me now. paintings, folded laundry, a slowly growing collection of letters. And though the ache didn't disappear overnight, it softened, like the ocean smoothing jagged stones. The damage was real. But so was the healing. I was peeling apples when the call came through. Arthur's name lit up on my screen, steady and calm like always. I set the paring knife down, wiped my hands on a towel, and picked up. "He filed," Arthur said without preamble. "Again." I didn't flinch. "On what grounds this time?" "He's claiming your initial trust setup was done under coercion, that you were manipulated by legal counsel while under mental distress." I almost laughed. "You're the legal counsel." "Yes," Arthur replied dryly, "which would make me the villain in his version of events." "What's he actually after?" "The house. What's left of the accounts, and he's trying to overturn the charitable donations clause. He wants full control over your assets as next of kin." I stared out the window, the sky shifting to overcast. "You think it'll get traction?" Arthur paused. "Not in any court with a working judge, but we're going to court anyway." I sighed. "Public hearing?" "Unfortunately, yes. He pushed for it." "Let him." We set a date. I wouldn't be attending in person. Arthur would represent me with power of attorney, but I sent him what he called the finishing blow the night before the hearing. It was a flash drive. On it was an audio file I had recorded 6 months earlier, back when Nathan told me, clear as glass, that the best gift I could give him was to disappear. I had saved the voicemail. I had even written it down by hand, transcribed every word. But hearing it, his voice, his tone, his certainty, was more powerful than ink. Arthur queued it up in court. The courtroom was full of quiet tension. Nathan sat across the aisle, red-eyed and stiff. Sophie wasn't with him. When Arthur presented the trust documents, the witness statements, the medical clearance, the time-stamped emails, and finally my audio recording, the judge leaned forward in her seat. Nathan's attorney objected to its admission. The judge overruled it. And then Arthur played it. In the center of that quiet courtroom, Nathan's voice echoed, "The best gift you could give me is if you just disappeared." No context could soften it. No lawyer could explain it away. When the file ended, Arthur waited 3 beats before speaking. My client granted that wish, but not out of spite. She did it legally, quietly, and with full competence. What my client did was not abandonment. It was survival. And everything she put in place followed both the letter and the spirit of the law. Nathan looked down. His attorney asked for a recess. It was denied. The judge called for closing statements. Arthur ended his with a line I had written him in an email. "You wanted her to disappear? She did, and she took everything with her." 36 hours later, the ruling came in. Nathan lost, completely. The court upheld every provision of the trust, every donation, every clause, every distribution. They even ordered him to cover the legal fees. But the bigger blow came after. Arthur filed a separate civil suit for defamation, emotional distress, and harassment, using the welfare check incident, the consulate reports, and the baseless medical allegations as evidence of a pattern. The judge approved it. Nathan's public record would now include a failed petition, a lost inheritance battle, and a pending suit from his own mother. It didn't make me happy. It made me free. I received the news on a rainy Tuesday. Arthur emailed the decision with the subject line, "All quiet now." I read it once. Then I walked into the living room and turned on the radio. An old Etta James song played. I let it fill the flat, not because it was a celebration, but because it felt like a closing curtain. That afternoon, I took a walk to the market. I bought pears, candles, and a small bouquet of wildflowers. I passed a street artist painting in oils on the bridge. His canvas was half finished, a woman in a bright scarf standing at the edge of a dock. He looked up. "Care for a portrait?" I shook my head. "Not today." But I paused. That woman in the painting. What's she waiting for? He looked at the canvas, then back at me. She's not waiting. She's deciding. I nodded. That sounds right. When I got home, there was an email from Sophie, shorter than the last, just one paragraph. He knows now, everything, the money, the tape, the case. I think losing the house broke something. I tried to warn him, but he thought you'd never really go through with it. He said you were bluffing. I told him you were reclaiming. I don't think he understands the difference. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. Later that evening, I sat at my desk and opened the envelope with the letter the twins had sent me weeks ago. I read it again, slowly, like a prayer. We are proud of you. That was all I needed. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind carried the scent of rain and salt. The candle on my windowsill flickered once, then settled. And in the dark, I whispered what I had carried all this time. You wanted me gone, but I'm more present now than I've ever been. I used to think legacy was about what you left behind. Money, houses, heirlooms neatly labeled in storage bins. But now I believe legacy is the life you choose when no one's watching, the boundaries you protect, the silence you break, the voice you claim after years of giving it away. 6 months after the court ruling, I published a book. It wasn't flashy. No agent, no book tour. Just a paperback released through a quiet local press in Dublin, printed on cream paper with a cover of soft ocean blue. The title was simple, When Love Becomes Chains. The subtitle, A Mother's Story of Letting Go Without Guilt. Inside were my blog entries, my statements, my letters. The 21-page list, lightly edited, placed near the center like a spine. At the end, I included one final essay titled, Respect is the Real Inheritance. I thought a few women in my watercolor class might buy it. Maybe Ingrid would share it with her book club. But then something strange happened. Erica Dawson, the woman who had interviewed me months ago, read it live on her YouTube channel. She held up the book page by page, reading passages aloud, pausing only to wipe her eyes. That video reached over 500,000 views in 3 days. The next week, a reviewer from a podcast in California called it the most honest book on modern motherhood I've ever read. Orders flooded in. Bookstores in Boston, then Seattle, then Austin began carrying it. Then came the real surprise. I received a letter from a university. A professor of sociology asked to include the book in her fall curriculum on gender, aging, and autonomy. She called it Required Reading for Every Daughter, Mother, and Son. I printed that email and taped it above my desk. But the one letter that meant the most arrived in a plain white envelope with Denver postmark. There was no name on the return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside were 2 sheets of lined notebook paper. The first was from James, the second from Lily. James wrote, Dear Grandma, we read your book. Mom let us. She said it's important to understand hard things. I didn't know how much you helped us. I didn't know people could say no in a way that still means I love you. I hope when I grow up, I remember what you taught me, how to walk away when someone forgets your worth. Love, James Lily wrote. Hi, Grandma. I drew your scarf in my sketchbook. The green one. I remember it from the picture. I want to be brave like you. I hope you are warm where you live. You are my favorite story. I pressed those pages to my chest and cried, not because I was sad, because I had wondered, quietly, deeply, whether I would ever be remembered as more than a source of conflict, whether the next generation would inherit the wrong version of me. But they hadn't. They'd seen the full picture. I replied the next day, just one letter, typed, printed, folded neatly. Dear James and Lily, you are the best chapters of my life. Not because you are perfect, Not because I was, but because you still have the chance to choose love with boundaries. One day, someone may ask you to shrink, to give, to vanish quietly. And I hope you remember this story, not as a warning, but as a compass. Love loudly, but love yourself too. And never be afraid to start over if it means reclaiming your peace. Always, Grandma. I included a small check from the trust, a token, not enough to change their lives, but enough to remind them they were part of something lasting. Later that week, Ingrid and I celebrated the book release at a cafe with terrace seating and live violin. She gave me a gift, a simple silver ring with one word engraved inside. Stayed. I thought it might say, left, I said, laughing. She smiled. No, you left the pain. You stayed with yourself. I wear it every day now, not as a trophy, as a reminder that I didn't disappear. I reappeared. In the months that followed, I started teaching a writing group for women over 60. We meet every Wednesday in the community center, upstairs from the watercolor class. We call ourselves the Second Draft Society. We drink too much tea, laugh at inappropriate jokes, share poems we wrote in our 20s and never dared read aloud. One woman wrote a story about burning every casserole dish she ever owned after her divorce. Another wrote about sewing her own funeral dress just to freak out her kids. We honor every word, every reclamation, every act of late-blooming defiance. Sometimes after class, I walk alone by the river and whisper, thank you to no one in particular, to the air, the past, the silence that finally broke. I no longer ask if Nathan is angry. I no longer wonder if Sophie regrets staying silent. I no longer carry that weight. It's not mine anymore. One afternoon, a young woman stopped me outside the bookstore. Are you Helen Moore? She asked, breathless. I nodded slowly. She held up a copy of my book, worn and dog-eared. You don't know me, but I just wanted to say, my mother walked away after reading this, from a life that was eating her alive. She lives in Spain now, paints seashells. She told me she finally feels free. So, thank you. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. That night, I wrote one last entry for the blog. The title was, Disappearing Wasn't the End. It was the beginning. I wrote, we are not here only to serve or to survive. We are here to claim space, to draw the line between love and loss of self. And if it takes vanishing to become visible again, then maybe disappearing was the most present I've ever been. I clicked publish. Then I went to the window and opened it wide. The air was brisk, sweet, clean. I closed my eyes and breathed in my legacy.